Hi, it's Dwyer. It is March 12th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me just say, there was a great fight that took place a few days ago. We haven't had a chance to discuss it. It's a very important fight, folks. And I'm not talking about Lamont Roach against Gervonta Davis in front of New York State, trying to get that ridiculous refereeing job overturned, right? No, I'm actually talking about two guys at 140, both of them southpaws. One of them has beaten Gary Antoine Russell, who might quietly be the best in the division, right? They went head to head. I'm talking about Alberto Puello against Sander Martin. Folks, just understand, there's a reason why Gervonta Davis is staying at 135. I believe both of these guys are two of those reasons. Both would give Davis all he could handle, right? Because both can move, both have back feet. Both are masterful counterpunchers. Martin is actually better on his front foot, in my opinion, than Puello. Just understand, you're talking about a lot of great back foot guys at 140 pounds, right? Let me also point out, too, that the division is so deep. The guy at 154, who just got knocked out by Keith Thurman, who looked good. We'll talk about that fight next. Previously got knocked out in one round just a couple of fights ago in 2022 by Liam Paro, a guy who's at 140 competing, right? You know my thoughts on Richardson Hitchens. I know many of these guys are not household names, right? Just understand, all of the guys I just named, all of them, Puello, Gary Antoine Russell, Sander Martin, all of them would leap at the opportunity. I mean, leap at the opportunity to fight Gervonta Davis at 140 pounds, right? I would not hesitate to take any of those guys against Ryan Garcia, right, as Garcia is making his comeback, right? Because, folks, these are all pros, right? You're looking at the Puello-Sander Martin fight. Close fight. Puello enters as the champ. He leaves as the champ. Let's just say if both guys entered and neither guy had the title, I could have seen that fight going to Sander Martin or being declared a draw. Right, let me say this too. Puello, close fight against Gary Antoine Russell, who had not fought a southpaw for years. You could tell that Russell had problems with the stance, but even that fight was awfully close and could have gone either way. Right? So, the point of all this is, if you're looking at fights at 140, and if the spread is too wide, right, they have a guy. We'll just pick one randomly here. Teofimo Lopez. Right? And he's a big favorite. Folks, the water's so deep at 140, you need to look hard at whoever he's fighting. Right? Teofimo has a fight coming up against Arnold Barbosa. Pay close attention to that fight. Right? What we think we know about boxing, we might not know. And understand too, in part because of COVID, right? Matches a few years ago slowed down a little bit. In part because some of the champions aren't taking on all comers, right? Gervonta Davis just hasn't tested himself. He used to fight in other weight classes. Now he's tethered to 135, and now he's fighting childhood friends. What he's figured out is that the guys who know him well, the guys who remember him on the way up, The guys from around his way aren't intimidated by him. Right? Understand that he has an explosive straight left. Right? Both up top and to the body. He has talent. He is sudden. Right? But at the same time, if you can guard against that straight left, you can defense him. Let's talk about Keith Thurman. Folks, you realize since 2019, Keith Thurman's only had 2 fights. One was against a guy who's now one of the reigning champions at 147, Mario Barrios. Right? The other fight was the fight yesterday against Brock Jarvis. Now understand, whatever you think about Jarvis, right? And, truth be told, Jarvis was new really at 154. He had a prior fight against a guy on a losing streak at 160. But Jarvis, like Keith Thurman, is just getting acclimated at 154. Right? Now, I'm not saying Jarvis was that spectacular an opponent. He is a puncher. But what I am saying is, look at Thurman, fully prepared for the fight. A lot of lateral movement. Right? Thurman, who is known for a punch, is outside, and he's moving both directions. Right? Short fight. It's interesting seeing a guy with sudden power, two-handed power. Right? Thurman can take you out with a right or a left. Outside, circling. Right? Thurman, not in a rush. Not by a long shot. Let me say, too, he has ring coverage on both hands. Right? The end of the fight is remarkable. Thurman just leaps over, throws a haymaker. You would have thought you were watching Deontay Wilder. I'm serious about this. One punch changed the fight. Jarvis starts backing up. Then, of course, Thurman, who can close, goes over and closes. Now, Thurman's older. 154 is particularly loaded. Right? 154 has ringers. Right? Telez is a ringer. Murtazaliev is a ringer. These are guys who you don't really hear a lot about. But as I've said before, figure out the guys who are much better than advertised. And then when, you get the big line because they're fighting a Sebastian Fundora, who has 2 of the belts at 154, or if they were to fight an Errol Spence, who for a time was pretending he was going to fight at 154, right? Just understand, 154 has ringers, and it has straight up tough guys. Keith Thurman doesn't have a lot of wear on the tire, folks. Don't look at the age and then think, oh, gee, Keith Thurman's too old. He's too long in the tooth. This is really a George Foreman type situation, where the guy comes back after having been inactive. Again, Thurman, 2 fights in the last 6 years. After having been relatively inactive, the guy has a big punch. The guy has Hall of Fame know-how. The guy's two-handed. Right? So I think Thurman makes 154 extremely exciting, especially since Murtazaliev, who might be the best in the division, quite frankly, and Fundora are taller guys who look a bit too thin. And you just get the feeling a guy with a big punch like a Thurman might be able to target their bodies to try to chop down the redwood. Let me say this too. Thurman has 1 loss. Think about it. 1 loss on his resume. And that was to Manny Pacquiao. Now, Pacquiao had hand speed nobody has today. Pacquiao knocks Thurman down relatively early in that fight. Then Thurman actually mounts a comeback. It's not like Thurman gets blown out in that fight. Thurman mounts a comeback, makes that fight competitive. Thurman loses it. Folks, that's his only loss. That's his only loss. And if you look at the guys Thurman has fought, he fought a lot of tough guys in his career. Right? So keep an eye on Thurman. It's very important to keep an eye on these opponent guys, right? If you're talking about 154 now, people are going to talk about Murtazalayev, Virgil Ortiz. Those are going to be the top names, right? I'm hearing Ortiz is having a problem making weight. I'm expecting Ortiz to eventually end up at 160 pounds, right? That might open the door a bit for Tellez and for Keith Thurman, right? Let's just say Thurman has a lot of big fights if he wants them, right? Some of these older guys, you know, they're hanging around the sport, but you get the feeling they like the idea of being around the sport and being a boxing celebrity more than they do lacing up the gloves and actually fighting. Thurman, of course, claims that, you know, he had signed contracts. A lot of people backed out. Wow, that many people backed out where you're averaging one fight every 3 years? That seems a bit of a stretch. But what I can tell you is skill-wise, this guy's extremely dangerous. In my favorites folder right now, I have the highlights from the Thurman fight. I believe I also have the whole fight. Right? You're going to notice the lateral movement on Thurman. In other words, Thurman doesn't treat Brock Jarvis as if he's a foregone conclusion. Right? Thurman's strategy, even with Thurman's punch, and Thurman's a puncher, right, was actually to set the guy up, to use lateral movement, to get him turning, then to be sudden. Right? And let me just say, you know, I mentioned Deontay Wilder earlier. Not a lot of lateral movement, not ring coverage, no ring coverage on that left hand. Right here, you're getting that with Keith Thurman. This guy is dangerous. He's calling out Tszyu. Be careful what you ask for. Right? I believe he might have more success against some of the other guys because you have a lot of hunters at 154. Right? Sebastian Fundora, throw the height out the window. You understand Sebastian Fundora is going to try to come find you. Murtazalayev fought Tszyu and came in to find him. Right? That was the strategy. You're not going to see a lot of back foot out of Fundora. Murtazalayev, I just haven't seen enough to know whether he has a lot of back foot in him. Right, folks? If you're just front foot, you're going to have a problem with Keith Thurman. Right? This is one of those guys who's going to end up in the Hall of Fame, who is still having fights for some reason. Right? Let's appreciate him. Let's also appreciate the fact that the guy is moving up in weight. Right? Keith Thurman really made his bones at, 147. Here he is up at 154. Now, speaking of weight, and I'm going to save this fight for premium subscribers, but pay attention to the fine print for the Devin Haney Jose Ramirez fight. Right? Understand, Haney, of course, was supposed to fight Ryan Garcia at 140. Ryan Garcia blows weight by 3 pounds. Right? Haney made weight. Understand, Haney fought Regis Prograis at 140 pounds. Well, this Jose Ramirez fight, and Jose Ramirez fought an underrated Arnold Barbosa, right? And 2 of the judges had that fight 115, 113. Right, folks? When a front foot heavy guy gains weight after a loss, that might be an indication that the guy had weight cutting problems. let me say too that Devin Haney, and I made a video about this very point maybe 18 months ago. Devin Haney between fights balloons up, right? He's really a Roberto Duran, a Ricky Hatton between fights. Let me just say, you're talking about a guy who, even though the match got nullified because of Osterin in Ryan Garcia's system, right? In real life, it actually happened. Devin Haney got knocked down multiple times by a guy who was overly reliant on his left hook in Ryan Garcia. So now Haney's going from 140 to 147 against a guy who's going to be on his front foot and is going to be pursuing him. That fight, by the way, 12 rounds. In other words, you're going to have guys who are new at welter, and they've tacked on 2 extra rounds for their first welterweight fight. Pay close attention to the fine print. Folks, Devin Haney, as I see it, is a mover, right? You always have to ask yourself, can this mover handle the weight gain? Now let me name 2 fighters who have, spectacularly, right? One is Usyk. Jumps up to heavy from cruiser. Understand how big the jump is. Cruiser's 200. Usyk's around 230 as a heavyweight. So that's a 30-pound weight gap. Understand, too, he's fighting guys who are heavier than that, right? He's fought Anthony Joshua. He's fought Tyson Fury, for crying out loud, right? He's feasting on guys who are heavier than him. Another example, and this one's a bit of a shocker, but it happened. Let's acknowledge it. Jake Paul for the Mike Tyson fight gains more than 20 pounds. Right? Jake Paul was fighting around 200 against Mike Tyson, and granted, Tyson was in his 50s. Jake Paul made Mike Tyson look like he was standing in cement. Right? Jake Paul had the legs, 20-odd pounds above his prior fight. But it's not that way for everyone. Right? Devin Haney doesn't have the punch. Right? We're going to find out a lot in this fight. He did knock down Regis Prograis. I'll concede that. Prograis, of course, gets back up, goes the distance. Right? If the weight gain doesn't give Devin Haney more power, and if the weight gain slows down his foot speed, and if rust and bad memories of getting dropped multiple times in a high-profile fight in New York City against a loudmouth who, you've been competing against since your days in the amateurs, right? If those bad memories cause Devin Haney to not be at his best, let me just say, Jose Ramirez is not going to give you time to think. There's a key moment in a Ramirez loss, right? He has Josh Taylor. This is Taylor before Taylor runs into problems with Jack Catterall. He has Josh Taylor up against the ropes. Now think about that. Taylor, hyper-aggressive, right? Taylor never figured out that he's better on his back foot playing Matador than he is on his front foot being a bull. Well, he actually had his back up against the ropes. Ramirez at his best can be that aggressive. And just understand what happened. On his back foot, back up against the ropes, Josh Taylor lands a home run shot that changes the course of that fight. Right? Against Arnold Barbosa, who throws many more punches, then Jose Ramirez. Just understand, two judges had that fight 115, 113. Right now, Ramirez with extra weight. Right, a guy who's not trying to be on his back foot and be cute and use foot speed to avoid your punches. But a guy who is in the trenches, throwing power shots, pursuing you, a hunter, not the hunted. Right, a bull, not the matador. You get the feeling this is a big opportunity for him in a weight class where, let's face it, Jaron Ennis has not looked like a world beater of late. Right? Where Abel Ramos was rearranging Mario Barrios' face. Guys, those are the champs at 147. In other words, this division is a division that might be up for grabs. Right? I've seen Ennis look great. Ennis fought 2 fights against the Karen guy, and the styles did not match up for Ennis. Right? Maybe Ennis will get back to greatness. But it's an open question right now. Right? Ennis has had some lackluster fights, plural. So let's pay attention to what's going on at 147. Just understand, folks, Devin Haney is no longer at 140. Let me say, the mindset is a little bit different at 147. Right? A Jaron Ennis is going to try to come find you. Right? Mario Barrios had Gervonta Davis in trouble, in my opinion, until Floyd Mayweather walked over to Davis mid-fight. Right? This was Turkey before Turkey. And basically said to him, and we don't know for sure, but I'm guessing the way Gervonta looked at Floyd, Floyd basically said, "Player, what the hell are you doing? You're not winning on my scorecard. This fight is close. You're not here impressing anybody." Right? Davis ends up getting the stoppage on Mario Barrios, who is a little bit too offensively minded. Barrios is not a guy in the 7th and 8th rounds who takes his foot off the gas, thinks in terms of negative energy. Right? You see that from an Usyk. Right? You see Dmitry Bivol taking off rounds 4, 5, and 6 against the Beterbiev. Right? Mario Barrios hasn't gotten the taking rounds off memo. Gervonta Davis is fortunate that Mario Barrios was as aggressive as he continued to be in a fight that was up for grabs before the stoppage. Anyway, to sum up, take a good look at Keith Thurman. Right? Assuming he's going to fight again in the next year and not keep us waiting 3 years for his next fight, folks, he's well positioned to shock a lot of people. Right? He's calling out, he fought in Australia. He's calling out Tszyu, who is coming off multiple losses. Right? I think Tszyu is talented, but I also think it's a mistake to ignore when a fighter is on the way back. Right? I believe it'd be a mistake to ignore the fact that Devin Haney was on the canvas twice in a high-profile event, or 3 times, whatever the number was. Right? Let's say it's multiple. I think it's a mistake to ignore the fact that Tszyu, and I know that first fight was a cut head and stuff like that, involved cuts, looked flukish, right? But the bottom line is he's on a losing streak right now. Right? And, the bottom line is Keith Thurman is highly skilled. You can tell that just by the fact that he starts the fight against Brock Jarvis with a lot of lateral movement. Right? He has Brock guessing on where he's going to be and what he's going to throw. And, of course, what he throws in the 3rd round was heavy artillery. That's actually a competitive round. Then Keith Thurman lands a Keith Thurman haymaker. Just like in Deontay Wilder fights, the world changed for Brock Jarvis, right? You know, an opponent gets hit with a flush punch from a puncher. Wow. You know, let's just say Jarvis in Australia could not recover. Ref actually gives him an opportunity, by the way, to continue fighting. Then, of course, Thurman, who hits hard, comes over and throws, I believe, 2 punches. And that's the end of the fight. And we, the fans, were grateful that was the end of the fight, because it looked like Jarvis, a young guy who went into the fight with only 1 loss, could have been badly hurt. Right? Keith Thurman is live. Alberto Puello, Sandor Martin is live. Let's remember, Sandor Martin drops. Let me repeat that. Sandor Martin drops Teofimo Lopez. Right? The judges gave that fight to Lopez. Right? We can argue about it. Just like Ali in the 70s would not give George Foreman a rematch. Teofimo Lopez, who's doing things like looking like a tough guy in press conferences, pushing future opponents, right? Slapping future opponents, talking a lot of smack. He hasn't given Sandor Martin a rematch. If you see the footage of Alberto Puello against Sandor Martin, you understand why, right? Martin's not only a slick southpaw with an excellent back foot. When he wants, he can come in the pocket. I'll concede Teofimo is one of the best in the sport in the pocket, right? But let's just say boxing has fight styles where guys can operate outside the pocket, right? Like Jermaine Ortiz did when he fought Teofimo Lopez, right? Teofimo has a problem moving his feet. In my opinion, Josh Taylor made it easy for Teofimo because Josh Taylor wanted to engage him, right? The back foot, folks, is alive and well at 140. If you look at the highlights of Alberto Puello, and again, this is a guy who beat a very front foot heavy, Gary Antoine Russell, right? If you look at Alberto Puello, right, who's unbeaten, who's a champion as I make this video. And if you look at Sandor Martin, right, you're going to realize that if you're not prepared to deal with major back feet, right, guys with educated back feet at 140, you have no chance in that division. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. I look forward to your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let me also say too, think about all the lefties in the sport of boxing, right? That throws a lot of guys off, including southpaws, because southpaws are accustomed to fighting righties. Now, when you're fighting a southpaw and the guy actually has a back foot, right, you're dealing with not just angles problems, you're dealing with mobile angle problems. Right? So right now, in the heavyweight division, you had Alexander Usyk fighting Daniel Dubois, right? And in the first fight they had, there's talk they're going to have a second fight. Let's just say in the first fight they had, there are stretches of that fight where Daniel Dubois is just looking at Usyk confused, right? Because, of course, Usyk, mobile jab, slick southpaw, right, with extra pop on a straight left. Against Dubois, he doesn't even have to use that straight left that much, right, because he's actually controlling Dubois with his jab, right? That's the infamous fight where Dubois hits Usyk in the body, and we can debate where exactly in the body he hit Usyk, whether that was a legal punch or not. Right? But just understand, southpaws give everyone problems. You have some of the best back foot southpaws right now at 140. Right? That Alberto Puello Sander Martin fight is a must-watch fight. Martin starts on his front foot, right? And that's an eye-opener. You'll notice, too, that both guys are high risk, right? It's southpaw against southpaw. They at times look like they thought they were fighting a righty because neither guy sometimes has a hand up to protect their head. And some of the times, both guys get hit flush in the face with some hard shots, right? Good fight, worth the price of admission. Take a look at the highlights. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Keith Thurman is back, and folks, his airport has a runway, right? He'd have a real shot on Tszyu, right? And the bottom line is there's some taller guys at 154. If he can plan an entry point, be outside with the lateral movement, avoid getting hit by Fundora's punches, and Fundora's a guy who gives away his height. Then come in and land major body shots, right? Didn't Brian Mendoza beat Sebastian Fundora? Understand Thurman, with his punching power and veteran know-how, would have a chance on Fundora, right? Also, Fundora is following the Keith Thurman school of not fighting often enough. When was that last Sebastian Fundora fight? Folks, it's been a while. There is a possibility. Put it this way. You know you're in trouble when Keith Thurman's last fight was more recent than your last fight. There is a possibility that Thurman could catch Fundora at the right time when Fundora is a little out of sync due to inactivity. That's how I see it. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.